1932, Hitler gets out of jail, publishes Mein Kampf. What does he tell you right in Mein Kampf? To get money for his agenda, political aspirations, he says, don't think that I'm a bad man. I'm not doing anything out of the ordinary, anything wrong. Really, I'm basically basing my agenda on sound scientific research, funded by the Rockefellers, showing that blacks are genetically inferior to whites, and Jews too. He adds Jews. So now, a few years later, 1938, of course, you have the purging of the universities, of the Jewish professors. Where do you think the geneticists went? Most of them came here. That's right, most of them came to the United States. And they went to work for Rockefeller University. They went to work for Cold Springs Harbor, New York. They went to work for Rockefeller-funded also Yale, with today, which has the principal virology research department. They went to work for Rockefeller-funded also, built by Rockefeller money, University of Chicago. That's, by the way, where Dr. Gallo comes from. And that after the war, or during the war, what had happened? You've heard these stories. Many of you have heard of some of the atrocities during the Holocaust. Mild among the experiments that these lunatics did was they would take like a large gauge needle, gouge it into the eye of a human being without anesthetic, and extract a piece of eye color sample so that they can do gene analysis to find out what genes are associated with eye color. It's mild. You don't believe me? Just go to Washington someday. Go to the National Holocaust Museum in Washington, wherein you not only see the photographs, but you literally see the medical artifacts. So that now, at the end of World War II, eugenics got a bad name with Hitler. But they had to call it something else, you see now. To keep it going, they had to call it something else. They called it the Human Genome Project. The Human Genome Project, which continued at Cold Springs Harbor. Full speed ahead. Full speed ahead. And so then a couple years ago, I saw it today, they were talking about it on the news again today. They literally virtually completed they announced this, the entire human genome. So that they now knew the gene sequence for human beings, all of them. And that now they were beginning, because of this, they said, to be able to determine specific disease predispositions, genes that call for diseases in certain races. And now, every month or so, you're reading in your newspaper. Now you understand why you're beginning to read now. Gene for breast cancer in Jewish women discovered. Gene for sickle cell anemia in black men discovered. Gene for sarcoma cancer development in Jewish men of European descent discovered. Recently, gene for Ebola virus infection in black people discovered. They have genes for Alzheimer's and genes for this, but isn't it interesting how frequently it's genes for Jews and genes for blacks that they're discovering? See, now you might understand why that is. The racial hygiene agenda appears to be ongoing, as does the Holocaust. As we get involved in the next segment of this program, about the vaccines and the risks of the vaccines, you begin to see why it was that one of the top Pentagon officials came into my life very mysteriously and then left very mysteriously, but allegedly he said he's extremely concerned because the Pentagon, contrary to previous decisions, had reversed itself and is about to inoculate 1.2 million United States military personnel and their families with an anthrax vaccine that he was concerned would contain a virus, a designer virus, that could literally wipe out 37% of the United States military, which are black and Hispanic. And his concern was, you see, with a New World Order agenda, a very powerful United States military is a liability. When the power for surveillance and military force rests with the United Nations, funded and built by the Rockefellers, and the NATO alliance, one world governance, one world economy. He was concerned. And his concern was valid. You know why? Because when I called Gallo back, and actually when Gallo called me and he gave me some of his objections, here's one of the objections that Gallo gave me, and you'll see now that the concern for designer viruses is valid. Gallo said to me, one of his objections was, "You're wrong, Len. We couldn't have possibly developed the AIDS virus in a lab until at least 1975. Because he said, we did not have, quote, the sophisticated molecular genetic biotechnology capability that would have allowed us to construct the AIDS virus gene by gene until 1975, end quote." Now, you know what my response to that is this. Alexander Graham Bell did not need fiber optics to make his first telephone call either. And I have absolutely solid, documented scientific evidence that shows that what they were doing between 1965 and 1975 was this work that I described, recombining viruses in a very crude, sloppy, haphazard manner, and then it would take a long, tedious operation to separate these, isolate the different recombinants, the strains, and then test each strain to find out exactly what it would do. That took a long time. And, by the way, I have in my possession the definitive textbook that's titled Biological and Toxic Weaponry, published by Oxford University Press, wherein David Baltimore is a major contributor, wherein Baltimore's group says that, in fact, the AIDS virus was evaluated, as the Ebola virus was evaluated as a biological weapon. And unlike the Ebola virus, which was an ideal biological weapon, the AIDS virus was not a very good biological weapon. It was a good population controlling agent, but it was an excellent psychological warfare tool, Baltimore and others reported. And isn't that interesting? You see, what did they use? And what have they been continuously using the AIDS virus as but a psychological warfare tool? You see, the Christians blamed it on the sodomists, the gays, those gay people. And the whites could blame it on the black people, those black people in Africa, deep dark Africa. Just like Richard Preston's book, The Hot Zone, which said that, you know, these viruses are spontaneously mutating in bat guano at the deep dark cave in Central Africa, whereas population explodes, you see. Man cuts down the African rainforest, and these germs just jump up and that's the thesis of Richard Preston's book. What I show you that Richard, in the book Emerging Viruses, AIDS and Ebola, is that Richard Preston was paid $20,000 by the Sloan Foundation, the sister organization to the Rockefeller Foundation, to produce that counterintelligence piece of garbage that was meant to scare the heck out of everybody, and it did, and alert us that these viruses are coming, for indeed they are. But the Sloan Foundation, you see, provided Dr. Robert Gallo. Actually, first of all, the Sloan Foundation provided Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where David Baltimore came from, and the National Academy of Sciences National Research Council was heavily based. They paid him $200,000 a year during the 1960s under the, quote, neurosciences umbrella. How noble. For, quote, public management, mass persuasion, technologies, research, brainwashing. That's what that book is. And Lawrence Rockefeller sat on the board of directors that gave that $200,000 for brainwashing studies. And Lawrence Rockefeller was the director of the Sloan Cancer Kettering Memorial Research Center, one of the premier cancer research institutes in the world. And guess who they gave? They gave Robert Gallo many of the materials he needed to make the AIDS-like and Ebola-like viruses. Well, Lytton Bionetics researchers, I document that in the book. And as I told you, it was Lawrence Rockefeller who put together the International Blood Banksters. That, by the way, allowed 10,000 hemophiliacs in the United States and countless others to get the contaminated blood. They simply said that they didn't want to spend $150 million to clean the blood up. I can't believe that. Based on the evidence that I'm looking at, I have to suspect more strongly they wanted to get rid of these people.
But this is a multi-generational thing, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It goes back centuries. The New World Order agenda is centuries old. The contemporary evolution I'm going over now. So, this is where we stand today. They literally could produce viruses that only trigger certain disease predispositions and certain races. They're preparing you that Muslims are going to release these types of viruses. They're telling you this already. You're reading this in Tom Clancy's CIA writer book called Executive Orders. You're hearing it on shortwave radio in America and elsewhere. See, this is what they do. They use psychological warfare techniques, like the AIDS virus, to separate people, dividing people. This is how they work, to separate the sheeple, to conquer the flock. They divide rich from poor, black from white, Jew from Gentile. They've infiltrated every single religion, every single social organization, every single political faction. They have infiltrated, and they use fear to divide you and cause you to fear and hate, which gives them rationale for their policies, furthering their agendas. Nobody's ever stopped them because nobody has ever caught them red-handed with their pants down like I have. I have now the contracts. That's why I'm saying we now. The pain of this, it's now. I was just blessed as a servant. I was given this information. Do you know how I found those contracts? It was a miracle. I'll tell you how I found those contracts. This is a side story, real quick. I thought I was done. You know, I thought I was done. I was ready to write it up. Finish the book, write it up. All I needed was 2 references, 2 citations. I was driving from Florida to New York with my wife and first daughter, Elena. And I was on my way to give a seminar. They canceled the seminar. I called from North Carolina. Why? Because they had painted the auditorium. They didn't want to intoxicate the people who attended the seminar. So they canceled the seminar. They couldn't get another room. Gave me 2 days down. We're now in North Carolina. Rather than go to the shore, it was a spring day. It was beautiful blossoms. I said, why don't we go to University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill Davis, public library, or the School of Public Health, where they have fabulous library, and I can get these 2 citations. And I was directed, we went there, I was directed to the Davis Library, where they have the government documents office. So I get my library pass, and I go up to the librarian, because I don't know where the congressional records are. And here is a 6'4" fellow, big, 350 pounds, with a sophisticated air of library science all about him. He said, I say to him, excuse me, I wonder if you could help me. I'm looking for the congressional records. Here's my pass. I have a pass to the basement, government documents office. He says, yes, follow me. And he darts off. Now I'm rushing after him. I'm rushing to catch him, go through a couple doors, corridor, down a flight of steps. He's now about 10 yards in front of me. And I'm rushing to catch him. All of a sudden I hear a voice inside my head that is as strong as me talking to you right now. So stop. Turn right. I stop, and I turn right. I mean, like, you don't question something. He says, voice starts, walk. Start walking. But now I got a problem, you see. I got this big guy over here. He turns around. He sees I'm not following anymore. He says, hey, where are you going? Now I got to think fast. Don't mind me. I'm just going to go over here. You think I'm going to tell him I got a voice in my head? He says, no, your congressional records are over here. I say, fine, thanks, I appreciate that. I'm just going to have a quick look over here. Don't mind me. He says, no, your congressional records are this way. I said, well, here's what, walk. I said, fine, thanks, I'm just going to go over here for just a second. Don't mind me. He says, no, that's not where your records are. That's not how you conduct research. I got God talking to me, and this guy's telling me how to do research. He says, your records are over this way. I said, fine, I appreciate that. Just 1 minute, I'm going to go have a quick look over here. I will be right back, don't mind me. So he gets frustrated. He says, fine, I'll get your congressional records. So he goes and gets my records. I hear this voice. He says, walk. I start walking. He says, slow. I slow. He says, stop. I stop. Turn left. Turn left. Walk. I'm now walking down an aisle. It's approximately 70 yards long, 8-foot-high stacks on both sides. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of volumes on both stacks. This voice says walk, I walk. It says slow, I slow. It says stop, look down, left, knee high. There, the words Special Virus Cancer Program pops out in my face. And if you open the book up to that section that talks about the contracts, the Special Virus Cancer Program chapter, you see the cover of the book. The book that had been pulled off of the library catalogs. So that then, after I photocopied the thing, first of all I said, I grabbed it. I said, oh, man. I opened it. I happened to just open up to the page that said Lytton Bionetics. I said, I found what I'm looking for. At any rate, I went to find this in the library catalogs. They had pulled it off the library catalogs. It's so incriminating. It listed all the names of the people involved, the organizational diagrams, the flow charts, you know, the organizational chart. It's in the book. Names, addresses, telephone numbers, allied agencies. Everything they did, were doing, planned to do. Even how much they were paid. I then went to the National Cancer Institute's library, where anywhere there's where the book would be, you think? Computer search, the title came up, said after all 7 of the series, this title, no longer in library's catalog, no longer in library's catalog, no longer in library's catalog. They pulled it. I found it by luck. I couldn't even find it at all at Harvard. The title didn't even come up at the Harvard Library. So, at any rate, you think about the miracle of this, and it's absolutely unbelievable. Now, the issue of vaccines that concerns me greatly. Somebody asked me before, well, what about flu vaccines? Unfortunately, my mother died of one. Matter of fact, my sister-in-law is sitting in this audience, and her sister is sitting in Vernon, minding a couple sick kids. And our sister-in-law today suffers from chronic rheumatoid crippling arthritis because she took a hepatitis B vaccine in Calgary Hospital. She took the first one. She got very sick. She went back to work as a brilliant microbiologist at the hospital, working in an independent lab. And they told her, you have to take this next shot. And she says, I already got sick from the first. She says, I don't want to take the next shot. They said, you have to. You've already spent so much time and money in your career, you'll never work in another hospital again. She took the next one. She has difficulty holding her baby in the mornings. She can barely hold him. Fingers all swollen. This is a magnificent human, trusting, loving human being who used to go every weekend just about hiking in the Canadian Rockies here with her husband. My mother was a, believed doctors were gods. And so she would routinely go for her flu shots. So my mother, one day, starts to feel numb in her legs. She goes to the doctor. A couple weeks later, she's diagnosed with this, what's called Guillain-Barré, the French polio, they called it. And the doctor, when I questioned him about this, what is this thing, first of all? Oh, it's a progressive autoimmune disease, whereby the victim's, patient's antibodies and white blood cells start attacking the myelin sheaths surrounding her nerve fibers. You see, as the contaminants connect to the myelin sheaths, forms an antigenic complex, just like the AIDS autoimmune response. He told me that the myelin sheaths start to get eaten away, and as it does, she becomes progressively paralyzed. And my mother became paralyzed. She suffered with that for 3 years. Started to almost get over that, we thought. And then she developed another immune system dysfunction-related illness called cancer. A couple radiation treatments, and about 8 months later, she was dead. And when I spoke to the doctor the first day, I said, who gets this disease? He said to me, interestingly enough, this is most frequently gotten in Jewish women. Now I look back with the knowledge that I have now, that you have now, I can't help but think that the people that my mother escaped in 1939 by catching literally the last boat that got out. Remember the one that turned back? They turned back, the boat came to the United States to let the Jews, people who are trying to escape Nazi Germany out. They turned one boat back. My mother made it out from the boat just before that one. The last boat. It was a miracle that my mother got out. The story is interesting. Miracle that I'm here. But I can't now help but think that the people she escaped in 1939 by coming to America killed her in 1994. And literally, I cannot help but think that the vaccines are majorly responsible for the ongoing Holocaust, as I'll go into. And I can't help but think that today's physicians' offices and public health centers that push these vaccines on us are like the concentration camps of yesteryear, and the vaccines are like the gas. Because if you think about it, who's behind this? What is their agenda? And what are they telling us? It's the same exact people, the same exact money, and the same exact message as they told those millions of people that they ushered into the gas chambers, who didn't struggle, who didn't fight, who thought and were told that they were going in for a public health measure for disinfection. Sound familiar? We are no different. If you do not study history, history repeats itself. We have been made to not know history. History is repeating itself. So let me go into the issue of the vaccines. Are these vaccines related to cancer? In my opinion, yes. Chronic fatigue, undoubtedly. AIDS, undoubtedly, in my mind, based on the evidence. And other modern maladies, like breast cancer, prostate cancer, you'll look and see. And then we've got to discuss, one fellow asked, are we going to discuss what to do? Yes, we better. This is my daughter, Elena. This is my first daughter. We have now two. As you can see, Elena says, I read banned books. My book was banned by the American Dental Association. The first year that we had it, first couple months that we had it, they made us pull it off the floor. The book, Emerging Viruses. My book is literally being censored, banned by all of the major chain store buyers in the United States as chain stores. That's not so in Canada. All of your Canadian bookstores have, virtually the chains have ordered the book, and they are available in Canada. Not so in the United States, despite the fact that the individual bookstores, hundreds and hundreds of them, constantly keep calling us for one or two books at a time. Thousands of dollars wasted for the company. Time and money extra for shipping and costs and calls and everything. They still don't want to buy this book in the United States. And I want you to know, despite that, because of magnificent human beings like you, who have decided that this is an issue worth fighting for, who have gone into bookstores and said, I demand that you bring this book into this bookstore. This is serving my community. This is my community. I want this book in this bookstore because of that. I want you to know within the next couple weeks, the book Emerging Viruses, AIDS, and Ebola is about to become a bestseller in hardcover. So, at any rate, I show this slide, though, to remind me to tell you what never to do. If you're ever asked the question, are your children vaccinated? Either lie and say yes, they've been taken care of.
Just say no.
Or if you say no, then say only one other thing. When asked why not, only say, for spiritual and religious reasons, I refuse to have my children vaccinated.
I say none of your business.
Well, that leads me to the story of what happened in my family, because my wife, for example, it was the morning, around November 23rd, 24th, in New York City. I was giving a presentation at the American Public Health Association meeting. And that was a Monday. The next day was Tuesday. I was supposed to be hosting a booth at the meeting, and 7:30 in the morning, I awake to crying, screaming. I usually wake up, I'm a late sleeper. I wake up after the rest of the family, you know. So what happened was, Elena loves to color. She's an aspiring artist. And she's on the bed coloring, and baby Aria, at this point, I guess she was a little bit 1 3/4 old. She is now, or 1 1/2 old. She's now crawling on the back of the bed, and she crawls in back of Elena, and Grandma's in the room, right sitting virtually next to them. Jackie, my wife, is cooking dinner, breakfast, making breakfast for the kids, and I'm sleeping, and all of a sudden, baby Aria crawls behind Elena's back. Elena sits up and accidentally knocks baby Aria, off the bed. She falls and breaks her arm. We take her to the hospital, and there the physicians and the emergency room people keep my wife and Grandma and babies and myself waiting for about 5.5 hours. Finally, about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they finally get to us. He sets the arm, takes an x-ray. The orthopedic resident then says to me, I'm sorry, the bone is 45 degrees off of where it should be. It's going to necessitate immediate surgical procedure with the placement of 2 pins, one of which may become dangerously close to the ulnar nerve, potentially leaving the child paralyzed for life. Now, during the intake session, when they asked my wife are your children vaccinated? My wife said no. And instead of saying none of your damn business, my wife, who is a trooper and wants to be an educator, throws out her hip, and don't ever do this, please. She says, well, have you seen the December 1994 issue of Money magazine that talks about the contamination of the polio vaccine with SV40 and DPT vaccines, which are horrifying and causing all sorts of things from autoimmune disease? Well, you do not say this or do this to medical egomaniacs. For what they wrote in the chart was that my wife is a little loony and we are a little loony. And so, you know, they're into holistics. And so I tell the doctor when he tells me this, any loving parent at this point would say, I think we need a second opinion. So he overhears me talking to my wife. Now, we've already waited 5.5 hours. I'm 5 hours now a drive from New York to Boston by car, where we have Children's Hospital, where I have a referral network, where I know it's going to be far less costly to treat my child. He overhears me saying to my wife, Jackie, I think I better drive you home this afternoon or fly you back right away. At which point he pipes up and says, you're not going anywhere with this child. The issue became, why aren't your children vaccinated? And because now she had a broken arm, they suspected, besides negligence, abuse. Don't you know we lost custody of our baby for 4 days? They threatened me with arrest. They threatened my wife with arrest. They coerced us into having my wife sign an, quote, informed consent statement allowing the surgery. And thank God it wasn't that resident that did the surgery. Another doctor came in, and thank God he did not need to do any of those things that that idiot told me. It was a closed reduction. Baby's arm was set. Then, after it was allegedly learned by the social welfare people who I was, and I was already on national radio telling people, and we had literally tens of thousands of people praying for us. They learned who I was. I had already told them I had a master's in public health from Harvard. I was a dentist for 16 years, a health educator, consumer health advocate. Didn't make any difference. So this could happen to anybody in Nazi America now, you see. So ultimately, the Social Services Department claimed that it was just a miscommunication, end quote. Miscommunication. But don't you know that when they released us finally after 4 days and released our baby back into our care, they sent us off with a warning. You can expect that even though it was just a miscommunication, that a social service agent from Massachusetts, your state, will be paying you a visit soon. Lock the door. Get a shotgun. So, but you can't do that. It's in Nazi America, you can't do that anymore. It's really true. The truth is that we have lost the privileges. You know, through taking the privileges, we've lost our sovereignty. Because we've lost our sovereignty, the state owns us. They own our children. They own our property. And you think all the time, you've owned it. You're wrong. That's a whole other course. It's a whole other subject. So at any rate, that's what never to do. The only thing that you can do is say, for spiritual and religious reasons, I refuse to vaccinate my child. That works. They have exemption letters that you can sign. They tell you that they don't, but they do. And then if they keep pressing you, here's what you do. They keep pressing you and say, you have to vaccinate your children. They can't go to school. You can't come to work unless you get vaccinated. You say, okay, under one, only I will have my child vaccinated, or I'll get vaccinated under one condition. And they'll say, oh, good, you've come to your senses. What's that condition? You say that you provide me with a bonded, notarized affidavit that states that you will assume all medical, legal, and financial risks in the event that my child or myself is harmed by this vaccine. Then you will see rats scurrying with their tails between their legs. And then if you should have the good fortune, like Canada's hero in this area, Galen Langto, the good fortune of having a legal battle over these issues, then here's what you do. Same thing, Galen Langto, for those who don't know who she is, she's from Quebec, and she is a pediatric physician who refused to vaccinate her pediatric patients. And then she wrote a book called The Medical Mafia, which was recommended to you earlier this evening. And that as a result of this, the Canadian Medical Association, the Canadian government, sued her to take away her license. And what she did is that she called friends, Barbara Lowe Fisher at the National Vaccine Information Center, John Martin, co-author of the forward of the book Emerging Viruses, AIDS, and Ebola, myself, and she scheduled us to come to testify on her behalf. So here's what happened. On Friday, John Martin presented to speak. At that point, Galen Langto placed into the public record the book Emerging Viruses, AIDS, and Ebola in her defense. Martin spoke until I guess it was around 11:30. They broke for lunch. Galen Langto was supposed to testify that afternoon, and I was supposed to come in Monday morning. At 1 o'clock or thereabouts, the kangaroo court judge came in, threw his gavel down, said, "Case dismissed." They will never, ever want to hear the truth, and when it's hit them in black and white in front of their noses, they will run. They will never want to have this information come out. So now we have the book Emerging Viruses, AIDS, and Ebola. You can say, "I refuse." You want to do something about it? You go right ahead. And then you call us. And we will be there. And we will celebrate together. Well, the end of the story is that Galen said that she was going to countersue them to bring the media attention to it. And however, to my knowledge, she has, and maybe somebody in the audience can, has she dropped the lawsuit or is she continuing the process?
Because she's a personal friend of mine, she has resigned as a medical doctor and declared herself a free physician, whereby she says, "I refuse to support death and its works," and she quotes World Health Organization, the Medicare program, so on and so forth, "and I will serve life faithfully." She has handed this to the College of Physicians and Surgeons, and they are now in total uproar. They know not what to do with this.
Yeah. Great. So, what about AIDS, cancer, and chronic fatigue? Well, hepatitis B, this slide reminds me to talk to you more about hepatitis B. I think it's a horrifying scam. In Canada, apparently it hasn't hit here yet, you still are recommended to give hepatitis B vaccines to 6-year-old children now in Canada. But in the United States, according to the Clinton administration's new law, 12-hour-old infants are required to get this vaccine. Infants whose immune systems are not even fully developed. Now, does this make sense? Well, let's look at some of the facts. First of all, hepatitis B virus is a bloodborne virus. It's a bloodborne pathogen. Far and away, sexually transmitted disease. The only other major risk groups is IV drug users. These two things account for far over 90% of all the hepatitis B infections, of which well over 90% of naturally infected hepatitis B individuals naturally recover. Now, when you press the pharmaceutical companies who make this, Merck, Sharp and Dohme, and SmithKline Beecham, they will tell you that 30%, question how safe and effective are these vaccines? They tell you that 30% of the people who get this hepatitis B vaccine never develop immune response. There's no benefit for 30% of the people. They don't know that. But meanwhile, people leave, and for example, in healthcare, they get the vaccination, they think they're okay. The next thing that they tell you if you press them is that you've got to get rechecked every 7 years because the immunity wears off, unlike natural immunity. So does that mean now, at age 7, you got to bring your child back to the doctor for an expensive, in the United States, blood test? I know you're in Canada, you think you're getting it for free or a little close to nothing. You're paying through the nose, through your taxes.
Oh, we know that.
I know you know that. So that in the United States, we're paying somewhere up around $175 for a blood test just to check the blood, and then if you don't have maintain the antibodies, you've got to give an inoculation or a booster. So that's at age 7. They're still not sexually active. They're still not taking IV drugs. What for? And now, at age 14, now they're just beginning to get in sexually active years, unfortunately. Does that mean you got to give them again? And you try to get a teenager to do anything, let alone go into a physician's office to get stuck. I mean, that's a trick. So, that's not the worst of it, though. Here's getting the worst of it. When you look at the package insert, it tells you the side effects. And it tells you that every time you get inoculated, 15% of those who get inoculated sustain mild swelling around the inoculation site. Oh, that's no big deal. I guess we parents who care for our children's health and safety, want to let them live, can deal with that. So can our kids. Okay. It says about 14, maybe 13% develop swelling of the lymph nodes, little flu-like symptoms, a little cold. Hey, no big deal. It says about 12, 13% develop more severe fevers, higher fevers, more severe flu-like symptoms. I, as a parent, now become concerned. I'm sure that you do too, as a parent. It says about 10, 11% more severe flu-like symptoms or potentially chronic ailments. 8, 7, 8% more severe, potentially long-term. 5, 6, even worse. 3, 4, really dangerous, potentially long-term chronic ailments. And then it finally gets down to, quote, less than 1% serious injuries. Now, when these people say less than 1% serious injuries, first of all, the serious injuries that they're talking about are death, brain damage, or chronic crippling rheumatoid arthritis, just like my sister-in-law has. And when these people tell me less than 1%, having studied who these people are and what they are up to, I'm sorry, as a public health professional dedicated to serve the public with the truth and protect people's health and safety, I must assume 1%. But I will make it up to them this way. I will cut in half the potential risk to the public. Because how many children do they tell us they want to inoculate with this vaccine? In the United States, it's approximately 40 to 45 million. So let's just take half of that. Let's say 20 to 25 million children. What is 1% of 20 to 25 million children? That is 200 to 250,000 children who, over the next 7 years, will develop brain damage, chronic crippling rheumatoid arthritis, or die from this one out of approximately 17, 18 vaccines that they are now allegedly requiring us to take. Does this make sense? Well, the numbers, when you think about them, 200 to 250,000 children over 7 years, you're looking at numbers that literally there were 35,000 people that died last year in the United States of AIDS. Hey, that's more people than died of AIDS. There are 55,000 that died of prostate cancer. Hey, that's getting close to that number, isn't it? 65,000 breast cancer. And when you look at the Centers for Disease Control's own admitted data, their statistics that they published, you find something even more extraordinary. For all vaccines and reported injuries, between 1990 and 1995, they reported that there were well over 45,000 reported injuries for that 5-year period. And that, they said, represented, quote, less than 1% of the actual injuries, end quote. Less than 1% of the actual injuries. Why? Because the physicians don't report them. Why? Because it's a liability, potential legal risk, potential large administrative headache. They don't want to have the parents look at them and make them feel guilty. So they say, I'm sorry, we don't know what caused this. I'm sorry, they must have eaten something. I'm sorry, it must be in their genes. I'm sorry, it's God's work. Now you take that number, and again, let's be kind to them. They say less than 1%. Let's just make it 1% in this case. That's being kind to them. Multiply 45,000 over 5 years times 100, and you are now looking at 4.5 million Americans who sustained vaccine-induced injuries over a 5-year period. That is close to 800,000 Americans a year get injured from vaccines. We literally have an ongoing Holocaust, and we don't even know it. We are just like the Jews and the Christians and the gypsies and the gays that were ushered into the gas chambers, and we don't even know it. I was in France about a month ago. Did a 5-city tour of France and Geneva, Switzerland. Fabulous, fabulous, our brothers and sisters over there that have grasped this issue and are running with it now and doing the same thing that we're now asking you to do here. Laid out the red carpet for me, and as a result of that, we had some major, major impressive things happen. In Geneva, Switzerland, the home of the World Health Organization, they create such a media stir. I was on the front page of both newspapers and television and radio, that the World Health Organization Director of Infectious Diseases was put on the spot, and he says, well, I don't really know Dr. Horowitz's research. I'll have to research it. And then he said, but you know, I can't believe what he's saying, really, because you know, I know that vaccines are safe and effective. And then I was asked to respond. It was a great battle. But people, individuals like you, who contacted media and got them involved. Friends, people, their favorite talk show hosts. And so they asked me to respond. Here's my response. They filmed. I said, this man is either a fool, a liar, or both. That's it. No other option. But in France, there is a man named Belzhinsky, Mirko Belzhinsky, one of the world's leaders in molecular biology and cancer virus research. He worked with Gallo, he worked with Montaigne, he published with them. Around 70s sometime, early 70s, he published a paper saying that the reverse transcriptase enzyme that I told you about, that unique enzyme he found in bacteria, and this was untimely announcement because his superior at the Institute, Pasteur Institute, Nobel Prize winner, had just published that reverse transcriptase did not exist in bacteria. And Belzhinsky found it and published. And he was demoted, defunded, and ostracized. And so Belzhinsky started a new career, researching all the anti-cancer drugs that he could find. And he found them, most of the best ones, in plants, plant extracts. And he began to study those and do research, and he started to have a huge following. So much so that when French President Mitterrand had developed cancer and was terminally ill and given no more than a couple weeks to live, and basically sent home to die, he went over to Belzhinsky's lab. Belzhinsky gave him some of his cancer therapeutics from plants and kept him alive another 18 months. Well, the French medical mafia went into Belzhinsky's lab about a year and a half ago. They handcuffed him, they took him out, they threw him in jail, they destroyed his lab. I met with him. He was confined to his quarters of his apartment. He couldn't travel. They took away his passport. They told him if he lectured, his life would be threatened. He would be in danger. He couldn't write. This is what's going on around the world. He handed me a paper. He says, when you meet with the CDC, and you see the good news is because of people like you getting involved, we've been pressuring people, we've been sharing the word. And as a result of people sharing the word, for example, how I got another story, quick story. I shouldn't tell you this, we're getting too late, but anyway, to make a long story very short, a wonderful story very short, as a result of one person who got me on the Art Bell show, which is listened by 6 million North Americans a night. One person did that. Somebody like you, who said, I'm going to call Art Bell, get Horowitz on that program. What happened was, as a result of that, a couple months later, the highest physician in the Nation of Islam, the health minister of the Nation of Islam, Ali Mohammed, announced a moratorium. He recommended a moratorium on US government mandated vaccines for all black people in the United States. And because of a legislative committee meeting for the National Medical Association, representing all the black physicians in the United States who also seriously are considering that recommendation, Centers for Disease Control directors came and met with me and Ali Mohammed and the National Medical Association. And we're now firing some very, very difficult questions for the CDC to answer. They won't be able to answer. One of the questions Dr. Ali Mohammed has placed on the table, besides scientific considerations, is whether genocide is an ongoing US policy, both foreign and domestic. But Belzhinsky said, when you go to these people, I want you to take this document with you. And he gave me a reprint of a scientific paper that he published. And he told me that he called Smith, Klein, Beecham, Topps researchers, and he called Merck, Sharp, and Dohme, and he told them, you know what? The study shows that there is a definite, very, very strong carcinogen in your hepatitis B vaccines. And you better get them out. I want you to know, to date, they have not gotten them out. It was Hilary Kaprowski, kind of the godfather to this whole area of molecular biology and virology cancer research. He said, quote, an almost infinite number of monkey viruses can contaminate the polio vaccines. So I told you about the polio vaccines already, that they're currently, the oral polio are being heavily contaminated with SV40. But it was Adolf Hitler that said, you know, if you tell a lie long enough, eventually it will be believed as truth. And the greater the lie, the more people will believe it. Well, you know, the phrase, vaccines are safe and effective, comes to mind here. Vaccines are safe and effective. Vaccines are safe and effective. Never a greater lie has ever been told. Let's look at how safe and or effective these things are. This is a diagram of the reduction in polio cases that began in the 1920s because of improvements in hygiene and nutrition in the world. This specifically relates to the United States and Great Britain. When I was at Harvard, as everyone who was in public health during the 70s, when we saw a reduction in the infectious diseases on the planet, we were all taught that this was principally due, far and away, by improvements in hygiene and nutrition. So that you see now, when Salk and Sabin comes along, and here's the Salk vaccine initiation, here's the Sabin vaccine initiation, you see that the effect on the downward curve had virtually little, if any, effect. So when they tell you that vaccines have solved our world's health woes, it's a lie. Here's a percent decrease in measles death rates. Again, same thing. Measles vaccine in the United States and England had virtually little, if any, effect. Meanwhile, how safe are these things? Well, here you see between 1980 and 1989, and virtually to this very day, that's the last 17 years, all of the polio cases in the United States have been caused by the vaccine. All of them, 100%. Between 73 and 83 was 87%. The other ones were unknown. In my state, when they initiated the vaccine, the year that they initiated the vaccine, there was a 642% increase in cases. And then they play games. You do not know what to believe. This is in Los Angeles, before 1955. This was kind of numbers of polio cases, and this was meningitis cases during the same period. After the vaccine, 1966, this was polio cases. All of a sudden here you see a huge increase in meningitis cases. So there's a couple ways you can interpret this. Either they're now calling polio meningitis, or because the symptomatology is different between meningitis and polio, it's possible that the vaccine induces a polio-like condition, but it's a little different. And many of us know people, children, who have had meningitis. It was Salk that said when you inoculate children with a polio vaccine, you don't sleep well for 2 or 3 weeks. Oh, how nice. They changed the standards, they defined things differently. They did this with AIDS a couple years ago, where you remember they expanded the definition of AIDS to include more diseases, so more complications, and so more people could get insurance benefits in the United States at least. Here's what they did with polio. As soon as they produced the vaccines, they changed the definition of an epidemic. How convenient. They almost doubled the number of cases that were required, from 20 to 35 per 100,000, so that would be showing that the vaccines are very effective in reducing the epidemics. And how effective are they? When 46%, in 1984, 46% of the children who developed whooping cough had been vaccinated against it. 58% of children who developed measles that year had been vaccinated against it. How effective are these things, really? Here is pertussis, whooping cough, one of the most horrifying of all vaccines that you just, Croft Woodruff from Vancouver interviewed me the other day, and just came out in the newspapers the other day, that now Canadian Health Ministry is recommending a new pertussis vaccine, saying that it's much less risky. Meanwhile, for years now, Galen Langto, other Canadian colleagues, myself and others, Vieira Schreiber, Neil Miller, we've been saying, screaming,